Hey, Redeem Mechanic here, and today we are going to be changing the condenser on a 2017 Ford Fusion with the 1.5. Into here for just 1 second. I'm filming this after doing that repair. I realized when I was looking through my footage, I did not do the standard disclaimer that if you've never done AC work before, you need to hear. If your system is not completely empty, you cannot just open it up and vent that stuff, especially this stuff. R1234YF might be better for the environment, but it is certainly not better for you. This stuff is flammable, it's toxic, it will actually suffocate you. This stuff is dangerous. So make sure your system is empty before you go and trying to open any part of the AC system. All right, so that's my disclaimer. Don't mess with this stuff. It's terrible for you. Start off by getting it up in the air a little bit. Get it jacked up and supported by a jack stand. And then we're going to take this top piece off here. And we're going to take the lower undercover off. All right, so we've got 9 of these little clips. You pop up, pull the centers out, and then pop it out. These little tools come in pretty handy for that. You can also just use a screwdriver to get them up. And just go around the perimeter, take all those up. Next, we'll take this felt undercover off using all these 10mm screws. Under here, we're going to go ahead and take our perimeter nuts, or perimeter bolts, off for the bumper cover. All these 7mm. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Looks like 12 of them. Inside the wheel well, on each side, you've got 1 little plastic retainer pin and 2 more 7mm bolts. Take those out. Okay, there's 3 more bolts we need to take out underneath, so we can move that fender liner, this thing out of the way. So you got 2 or 3 more 7mm bolts on the underside there. Get those out of the way, because what we want to do is be able to pull this fender liner back a little bit so that we can access the bolts. There's 2 8mm headed bolts up in there. I'll get a light on it in just a second. Okay. All right, so there's the bolts I'm talking about. There's one there, and then there's one further back here. So we want to get those 2, I think they're 8mm heads, get those 2 out. And that secures the side panel for the bumper cover. So what I did is, there's a push nut here, and a push nut right there. They look like this. I pulled those off too. It sure made that fender liner a lot easier to pull back. So then I got my 2 nuts off, and then in here there's an electrical connector you got to disconnect. It's right. See that big one right there? We need to disconnect that. Okay. All right. So next you're gonna snap them down. This, unlike most bumper covers, it doesn't pull straight out. It pulls down because you got these little tabs sitting here. Okay. So just grab it and gently pull it down to where it separates itself like that. Do that on both sides. We've got 2 more nuts. One right there and one right there up top. Okay. Take those 10mm out, and then you've got 3 across the front. 1, 2, 3. Take those out. All right, so before you go yanking that bumper cover off, there's a wiring harness underneath these 2 panels that they did not give you a disconnect for. So this has got 4 10mm bolts and 3 7mm bolts in the middle. You take this panel out, and here we are looking up on the passenger side. This goes to your ambient air temp sensor, which I've already disconnected. But this harness is connected to the bumper cover, and it goes up underneath this stuff. Since we're going to be removing the radiator support anyway, I'm going to go ahead and see if I can disconnect whatever I need to disconnect on this side instead of detaching the millions of Christmas tree harness cable ties that attach this harness to the bumper. If we had a little bit more length, we maybe could set it off to the side, but I don't. So we're going to start by removing this panel tab and these bolts, and take this wind diverter flap down and see if we can get to whatever this wiring is going to. Okay, so pulled that flap down, and this was going to the active shutters, which is right there. So there's some cable retainers that you got to disconnect, all those little kind of alligator teeth ones. And now we're disconnected, we can take the bumper cover off. There was one more disconnect on the driver's side up towards the top. There's this little disconnector there. It goes right there. Okay, so I took the other side out of that lower piece. By the way, this is an accident victim, so I'm finding chunks of stuff everywhere. Hopefully your car isn't like that. That's the reason why we're replacing this condenser. Somebody backed into this lady and poked a hole in her condenser. So your mileage may vary as far as how many chunks fall out at you. All right, so next step is we're gonna take these active shutters off. So I'm gonna start down here. Got some more push pins. Got a couple on each side. Let's take those out. One. Come on. Two. There's that one. I think that's all we gotta disconnect, because that doesn't look like it's hanging off the shutter. Go do the same thing on the other side. Okay, so your shutter system has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 10mm bolts, and then one little push pin. And that frees it, except for Ford in their infinite wisdom put a support bracket that wraps around the bumper. So if you look in there, see that? We're gonna need to take that little bracket off. There's 2 7mm nuts holding that on. Brainiacs, I tell you, brainiacs. Okay, so I got the shutter off. I want to show you what you got to do, because it was a little difficult, and I was doing it with one hand, so I really couldn't film it. But it sits, the bracket sits like this. You take your 2 bolts out, then it's got a couple of squeeze tabs, one here, one here, and one here. Take these 2 at the bottom loose, and it'll pull out a little bit. Then squeeze this one, and it'll pull out some more. But you can't clear the bumper with it like that. What you have to do, and it's hard for me to hold this, but take the shutter and rotate the shutter this way, because this top piece hooks like this. It's got a hook on it, so it goes like this. So instead of trying to rotate this up, you can't. You got to take this whole shutter, rotate it up, and then get that unhooked right there, and then you can take the shutter out of the way. Really a pain in the butt, especially for me, because my shutter, you can see, it was affected by the accident, and or not mine, the customer's, but it's cracked right here, so this was flexing back and forth. But all of this is plastic, so you don't want to get rough with it. And she actually has this other piece in the door of her car, so I'm gonna see if I can put that back on before we put it all back together. And then I'm gonna work on fixing that right there. I put some little plate right there to support it, and that should take care of that problem for her. Now we can clearly see the damage that was caused to the radiator. It was actually the missing piece from the shutter that flew and smashed into the condenser and took it out. This lady was parked somewhere, went inside, came back 20 minutes later, and drove home. When she got home, she noticed pieces missing from her bumper, and the AC wasn't working anymore. So I think somebody must have backed into her while she was parked. Anyway, so next step is we're going to move this charge air cooler out of the way. I'm gonna try to not disconnect the coolant hoses, so I don't have to drain the coolant out. I'm gonna give it a shot, but I am gonna disconnect this right here, the coolant temp sensor, or whatever temp sensor that is, because I don't want to risk damaging wires. But I'm gonna try to unbolt this and just kind of move it off to the side and support it. Okay, so that's out of the way pretty good. What I did is I put a little bit of foam right here because there's this support there, and didn't want to risk damaging the charge air cooler. So I put a little bit of foam on there to protect the cooler, and then I zip tied the cooler to the bumper, and that appears to be out of the way enough I might be able to slide that condenser in and out. The next thing I'm going to do, just to make it easier on me, I'm going to move this wind deflector out. It's only attached by this one little tab right there, so I'm going to pop that out and move that deflector out of my way. All right, that made life a lot easier. This gap here, I don't know if that's factory. I mean, if it isn't, somebody did a really good job in trying to make it look factory. It's uniform on both sides, but the edges of it are rough, so I don't know. Anyway, hopefully it is, because it sure makes things easier. Anyway, so there's our top nut we got to take off to get the top pipe off, and further down there you can see the other one, and then you can see that stud pointing out. That's our condenser mounting stud. So we're going to remove all of those, but it sure did make my life easier not having that piece of plastic in my way. Okay, so we got those top two pieces out. This one right here was kind of a little bit of a pain. Even though you have this hole here, you don't get a whole lot of throw on your tool, so you want to have a ratchet or a wrench that has a very high tooth count, so you can get that broke loose, and then you can just spin it off with your fingers once it's broke loose. And then this bolt right here, bolt stud, whatever it's called, that was easy. And then this bottom one, we can see it right here. It's just a 10mm. Use an extension, take it right out. Okay, so the mounting bolt on this side is about halfway up. It's right there. It's another one of those bolt stud combo things. Pull that off. Okay, so now everything is free, but the condenser sits in a saddle. See it right there? There's a saddle right there, and then there's another one on that side behind the dryer. And you want to go up and then over the saddle to take it out. Well, problem is, it doesn't go up because you've got everything in the way. So what we're going to do is we're going to bring the radiator support down a little bit. I don't want to take it completely off, because then we'll have all the rest of the cooling system kind of just dangling. And yeah, Ford tells you can support it with zip ties and stuff, but realistically, we only need about an inch or so of space. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take these loose and put longer bolts in there, or actually I could just use a zip tie here, support it here, bring it down to where I need it, and then take the condenser out, if that makes sense. Okay, so the bolts I found were actually way too long, so I kind of shorted them up with a socket, but I dropped it about an inch down, maybe an inch and a half on both sides. And then I went ahead and removed these little doohickeys out from the top. It's just like about a third of a turn this way, and then you pull them out, and you can see that's where the stabilizing, this is the pin, and that little rubber bushing down there, it all lines up together, and that's what holds the radiator in place. But I didn't want to have problems with that trying to line back up when I go back up, so I just pulled the pins out, so if I have to move things back and forth, I can easily. All right, and now we've got enough of a gap, I should be able to pull that condenser out. And there she is. So to get it out, I lifted it up, I brought it over a little bit, then I brought this side down first and kind of got it to where it was diagonal going this way out. You want to be careful that these don't rub against the back of the charge air cooler. You know, if it touches, it's fine, but if it hits it, it might break one of these tubes, and then you're buying expensive parts. All right, so there she is. We're going to put the new one in and reverse this whole process. All right, she's back in. I found it a little bit easier to install this line at the same time that I was putting it in, because this line kept wanting to get in the way. So I got it perched on this peg, got this line lined up, and then slid the whole thing over, and then so where this was attached, and then was able to fit it into the saddles a lot easier. Okay, so I got all my lines reconnected, got the compressor condenser mounting bolts back installed. I'm going to line these pins up now and put them in. I put the regular bolt in, but not all the way yet. So I'll put those pins in and then take it up the rest of the way. And while I'm doing that, I've got it pulling a vacuum so that I can test this system and test the connections before I put everything back together. You don't want to find a leak after all that, so it's worth it to just go ahead and take a few minutes and do that part now. Okay, so we did our vacuum, passed the vacuum test, and then I went ahead and threw a partial charge in it and sprayed some soapy water on my connections, and it passed that test. So I'm happy with the sealing, and I'm going to go ahead and put it the rest of the way back together. So we'll put our charge air cooler back on. It's your 4 8mm bolts and your connector. All right, so next I'm going to be putting this back on. So I went ahead and made a little bracket to repair that fracture we found, and I put the missing piece back in that the lady had saved. It's not the most beautiful thing in the world, but it works. This would be a perfect opportunity for one of those plastic welders, but I didn't have one. So okay, so I put the bar back there. I had my shutter, horizontal with the ground. Got the little hook lined up and then lowered it down. And then once I had it there, I put 2 bolts in the top loosely to kind of hold it up. And I started to feed the back into the back of the thing. Now, these shutters have to be all lined up in order to get that back to close properly. So if you're having a problem, just make sure everything's pointed the same direction, and then get it lined up and in. So then from there, I was able to tighten the bottom bolt by moving it back and forth, tighten that one. And now I can take the 2 support nuts off again and get my hand back there to tighten that top, tighten that top bolt while I just support it with my legs. Actually, the bumper holds it great, but see how much easier that is to get to now? And I snaked this side piece back up in there. Probably would have been easier to do that first, but whatever. It was not too difficult. Slide it up in there and push that Christmas tree back in. And then reattach it to the sides here. All right, that side's done. Reconnect the other side. Same thing. Bring this one over, snap it back in. All right. Next, we're going to just hang the bumper cover by these 2 bolts. Go along here. Make sure you get that connector that's right there. That's the little one. And then you got the big one right there. And then we have the 2 under here. You've got the ambient air temperature sensor, which is right there. Hook that up. Let me get a light on. Right there. And then remember, we disconnected this harness, all those pieces along there, and we plugged the shutter system back in. All right. And now we can go ahead and fasten the bottom pieces. There's a bolt I need to go grab, like so. And we can go ahead and put the rest of the bumper cover back on. All right, so you pop it back up into place, kind of hold it there with one hand, and just thread one of the 2 bolts in by hand, and you should be able to get it tight enough to where it holds. Then put the other one in and tighten both of them. Okay, so all our bolts are in on the 4 bolts up here. So we're gonna put the fender liner back in First thing you want to do is pop it up over these two studs, get that lined up, and then put your push nuts on. That's these ones. And then you've got your 7 bolts. You got 3 here, or 2 here and 3 underneath. Those are the 7mm bolts. Oops. These under pieces need to go in. Probably should have put them on before we put the bumper cover. They slide in. It's not that big of a deal, but those 3 I was talking about at the bottom, they go through that, so you don't want to put those bolts in yet. Slide this thing into place. It's got your 4 10mm and a bunch of 7mm that join them together, and then 3 on each side. Alright, so you got all your 7mm underneath here, all the way around the bottom. Then you got your 2 on the side, your 2 push nuts, and your Christmas tree push pin thing. Right. Then you tighten that bolt that you put in earlier, tighten these, or install these 3, and tighten that one, and put this cover back on with the 9 push pins, and then all we got to do is put the bottom cover back on that felt piece. And the last step is finish your charging up. For YF I use cans, I don't use the big cylinders. It's too expensive to buy and very risky to transport. So anyway, those pressures look good. 18 ounces is what this one called for. I've had a can that had 2 ounces left, and I had to put 2 8-ounce cans, so it works out perfect. And we are set to go. Anyway, hope this helps you guys.